We're going to be joined via Zoom by Executive Director for Access Chapter 2, Steve Letsike, to unpack the rights and challenges that the LGBTQI plus community faces in the justice system of South Africa. Steve, good afternoon. Thanks for your time here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers of SABC. Thank you.
Steve, just in view of what's happened in the Eastern Cape, perhaps it's going to serve as a microcosm for the broader issue in terms of inclusivity and justice at large. I wonder how you'd weigh in on, issues of violence and abuse in same-sex marriages or relationships. Do you think it's adequately being addressed as we speak?
Look, I think if you look at, what President Ramaphosa has approved as bills to respond to gender-based violence, I think generally one should acknowledge that South Africa is facing an epidemic of gender-based violence and also hate crimes. And these hate crimes also happens on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, but also hate crimes are also happening because of race and many other elements that we need to acknowledge. The programs that we've seen in the country where LGBTI organizations such as Access Chapter 2, Triangle Project in the Western Cape, Free Gender, and many others have been doing to try complement what government has put in place. I think what we need to see, we want to see law enforcement getting much stronger and also justice moving faster. I think for the last 24 months, I must say that the last 24 months, cases that have gone through the justice system have seen a much more faster response, unlike in the past. So we have seen progress, but we want to see much more faster progress and also coverage that we don't see only progress happening in the urban area, but we want to see more rural communities and systems working everywhere. So I think we want to really address and appeal also to communities. These cases are unnecessary and they are preventable. We don't want to see many more people dying because they are gay, lesbian, transgender, or any other, or even women or children for that matter.
Steve, I'm glad you spoke about the great strides that have been taken. We can't ignore that. Just also given our history as a country and the socio-political dynamics unfolding. One is questioning whether questioning the efficacy of the laws at this point. And, because it seems that the laws are there, but the violence amongst minorities and LGBTQI plus community at large still pervades society. They face enormous or disproportionate levels of violence at both intimate partners and strangers alike. Talk to us about the stereotypes that exist in communities, the stigma and discrimination, the consequences of that to date.
Yeah, and no doubt, I think you're pointing out very important facts there. 88% of LGBTI people in South Africa do not report any hate crimes or violence or human rights violation against them. That makes it 1 in 25, only 1 out of 25 LGBTI people gets to report. And this has to do with quite a lot of issues. The stigma and discrimination at service point. Many people who experience violence and human rights violation experience what we call secondary victimization. And the secondary victimization happens at service point. And it is why our government, and various partners working on this are trying to address this level of high stigma and discrimination. And this is why even as a LGBT organization, we are implementing what we call sensitization training. But the biggest challenge that you have even pointed is what levels of violence is happening. One also that takes a case in the intimate violence crime. We've seen this increasing. LGBTI people are also not immune to that very same activities of violence act. We have seen many partners, gay partners, lesbian partners. You take the case in Limpopo, in Venda, where a lesbian woman, in fact, their ex-wife they were charged with attempted murder, and now when they went out of prison, they actually killed their current partner and murdered them, brutally so. This is unacceptable behavior. Here, you don't even go far in Gauteng, in the east end of Gauteng, in Vosloorus, a gay man who was murdered by their partner. So the violence that we are seeing in communities, intimate partner violence, is the same rate of heterosexual, and this can't be acceptable for that matter. But what happens when you address some of the nuances in society around, violence, substance use and abuse, around mental health, around this, so many challenges that people are experiencing. It's no different from heterosexual. But I really do think community, society, families, all of these things, all of these efforts really requires all of us to introspect what and how are we contributing to the level of violence, because neither is the law or health services at a level where there needs to be preventing at this. The prevention happens where perpetrators must actually avoid raising a hand, avoid abusing, avoid stigmatization, and even violating others. The law is there on the basis that it responds to some acts that were perpetuated. Indeed, LGBTI community and many other victims and survivors of violence are using the judiciary system to actually access what we call justice. But what we really do need in this country, we need to prevent violence. There is no need in this country to continuously see people raped, violated, abused, and even murdered for that matter. So we do want our justice response and a justice system, which is an arm of state, by the way. We have a very strong legal system in the country.
Yes.
We want programs that actually deals with toxic masculinity and toxic society to actually reduce violence and prevent gender-based violence and hate crime.
Absolutely, Steve. In efforts to destabilize heteronormativity, you spoke about the sensitization training amongst many other initiatives that have been put in place. But with the GBV scourge in the country so high, with the initiatives put in place by government to train, various officials, perhaps even law enforcement officials at police stations to deal with victims, how would you say, we're faring on that front? What are some of the challenges that also, exist there? I'm asking this because this obviously also has huge economic ramifications and costs to society.
Your point is quite important. When we worked with the Deputy Minister, John Jeffries, of the Department of Justice, we have got what we call the National Task Team to End Violence and Human Rights Violation against LGBTI. We actually were trying to assess the cases that we have on the NTT roll. Where are these incidents happening? One, they are happening in townships, most of them, township communities that we all live in. Two, majority of these cases, people have left taverns, pubs and so forth at night, and they are walking alone and so forth. So they become targets. Even when the perpetrator eyes and targets a victim, they would have spotted them, they would have premeditated, they would have followed them and so forth. But alcohol, it's at the center of this, because we cannot ignore how people have resorted to really overindulge. There's nothing wrong, as I always say, people can drink alcohol as long as you drink responsibly. But the moment you do not actually, one yourself as a perpetrator, but also as a victim, to make sure that you are safe and you really are not drunk in a state that you are not able to see and walk in that way or in a space where you should be going. But perpetrator target, and they look at those weaknesses, and that's how they follow a person. So for me, we should not just look at how all of these things contribute to how our economy is weakening. Our economy is weakening on many grounds: poverty, inequalities, and unemployment. It's these three triple crises that the country is dealing with. But that on its own, in looking at how society relates, coexists, but also co-creates in a space that ensures that we can avoid things that contribute to our instability, mentally, physically, and even spiritually. And we are not even capable of taking the correct decisions. And this is why the violence in our country, this is where the robbing, mugging, attacking even elders, children, all of that. We have actually become a disruptive society because the rule of law is not followed even by society. Now we need to restart. We need a restart button, not only just the government, not
Yes.
only stakeholders. Society requires a restart button in a way that they contribute and they behave to respect human beings and to respect people that they live with.
Steve, it's going to take learning, unlearning, and relearning. And perhaps as that process unfolds, let's leave that conversation then. Thank you very much for your time here on the SABC.